Abraham Lincoln, born on February 12, 1809, was an American lawyer and statesman who served as the 16th President of the United States, from 1861 until his assassination in 1865. Lincoln led the nation through the American Civil War, the country's greatest moral, constitutional, and political crisis. He succeeded in preserving the Union, abolishing slavery, bolstering the federal government, and modernizing the U.S. economy. For months before his death, Lincoln had looked pale and haggard, but on the morning of the assassination, he told people how happy he was. Lincoln told his cabinet that he had dreamed of being on a singular and indescribable vessel, that was moving with great rapidity toward a dark and indefinite shore. Lincoln said that he had had the same dream before at nearly every great and important event of the war, such as the victories at Antietam, Murfreesboro, Gettysburg and Vicksburg. According to Ward Hill Lamont, 3 days before his death, Lincoln related a dream in which he wandered the White House searching for the source of mournful sounds. Lincoln said, "I kept on until I arrived at the East Room, which I entered. There I met with a sickening surprise. Before me was a catafalque, on which rested a corpse wrapped in funeral vestments. Around it were stationed soldiers who were acting as guards, and there was a throng of people, gazing mournfully upon the corpse, whose face was covered, others weeping pitifully. 'Who is dead in the White House?' I demanded of one of the soldiers. 'The President,' was his answer. 'He was killed by an assassin.'" On the night of April 14, 1865, the night of the assassination, the presidential party arrived late at Ford's Theater, and settled into their box. The play was interrupted, and the orchestra played "Hail to the Chief," as the full house of some 1,700 rose in applause. Lincoln sat in a rocking chair that had been selected for him from among the Ford family's personal furnishings. At one point, Lincoln's wife Mary Todd Lincoln developed a headache and was inclined to stay home, but Lincoln told her he must attend because newspapers had announced that he would. Lincoln's footman, William H. Crook, advised him not to go, but Lincoln said he had promised his wife. Lincoln told Speaker of the House Schuyler Colfax, "I suppose it's time to go, though I would rather stay," before assisting Mary into the carriage. A member of the audience observed that Mary Lincoln often called her husband's attention to aspects of the action on stage, and seemed to take great pleasure in witnessing his enjoyment. At one point, Mary Lincoln whispered to Lincoln, who was holding her hand, "What will Miss Harris think of my hanging on to you so?" Lincoln replied, "She won't think anything about it." In following years, these words were traditionally considered Lincoln's last, though N.W. Minor, a family friend, claimed in 1882 that Mary Lincoln told him that Lincoln's last words expressed a wish to visit Jerusalem. With Crook off duty and Ward Hill Lamont away, policeman John Frederick Parker was assigned to guard the president's box. At intermission he went to a nearby tavern along with Lincoln's valet, Charles Forbes, and coachman Francis Burke. It is unclear whether he returned to the theater, but he was certainly not at his post. It was also the same tavern famous actor John Wilkes Booth was waiting by having several drinks. After spending time at the saloon, Booth entered Ford's Theater one last time at about 10:10 p.m., this time through the theater's front entrance. He passed through the dress circle and went to the door that led to the presidential box, after showing Charles Forbes his calling card. Navy Surgeon George Brainerd Todd saw Booth arrive. Todd recalled that about 10:25 p.m., a man came in and walked slowly along the side on which the prey box was, and he heard a man say, "There's Booth," and he turned his head to look at him. He was still walking very slow and was near the box door when he stopped, took a card from his pocket, wrote something on it, and gave it to the usher who took it to the box. In a minute the door was opened and he walked in. Once inside the hallway, Booth barricaded the door by wedging a stick between it and the wall. From here, a second door led to Lincoln's box. There is evidence that earlier in the day, Booth had bored a peephole in this second door, though this is not certain. Booth knew the play by heart and waited to time his shot at about 10:15 p.m., with Harry Hawk delivering one of the hilarious lines of the play. The line was, "Well, I guess I know enough to turn you inside out, old gal, you sockdologizing old mantrap." Lincoln was laughing at this line when Booth opened the door, stepped forward, and shot Lincoln from behind with a derringer. The bullet entered Lincoln's skull behind his left ear, passed through his brain, and came to rest near the front of the skull after fracturing both orbital plates. Lincoln slumped over in his chair and then fell backward. Rathbone turned to see Booth standing in gunsmoke less than 4 feet behind Lincoln. Booth shouted a word that Rathbone thought sounded like freedom. Rathbone jumped from his seat and struggled with Booth, who dropped the pistol and drew a knife, with which he stabbed Rathbone in the left forearm. Rathbone again grabbed at Booth. As Booth prepared to jump from the box to the stage, a 12-foot drop, Booth's riding spur became entangled on the Treasury flag decorating the box, and he landed awkwardly on his left foot. As he began crossing the stage, many in the audience thought he was part of the play. Booth held his bloody knife over his head and yelled something to the audience. While it is traditionally held that Booth shouted the Virginia state motto, Sic Semper Tyrannis, thus always to tyrants, either from the box or the stage, witness accounts conflict. Most recalled hearing Sic Semper Tyrannis, but others, including Booth himself, said he yelled only Sic Semper. Some did not recall Booth saying anything in Latin at all. There is similar uncertainty about what Booth shouted next. It was either, "The South is avenged," "Revenge for the South," or "The South shall be free." 2 witnesses remembered Booth's words as, "I have done it." Immediately after Booth landed on the stage, Major Joseph B. Stewart climbed over the orchestra pit and footlights, and pursued Booth across the stage. The screams of Mary Lincoln and Clara Harris, and Rathbone's cries of, "Stop that man," prompted others to join the chase as pandemonium broke out. Booth ran across the stage and exited through a side door, en route stabbing orchestra leader William Withers Jr. He had left a horse in the alleyway. As he leapt into the saddle, Booth pushed away Joseph Burroughs, who had been holding the horse, striking Burroughs with the handle of his knife. Charles Leal, a young army surgeon, pushed through the crowd to the door of Lincoln's box, but could not open it until Rathbone, inside, noticed and removed the wooden brace with which Booth had jammed the door shut. Leal found Lincoln seated with his head leaning to his right as Mary held him and sobbed. His eyes were closed and he was in a profoundly comatose condition, while his breathing was intermittent and exceedingly stertorous. Thinking Lincoln had been stabbed, Leal shifted him to the floor. Meanwhile, another physician, Charles Sabin Taft, was lifted into the box from the stage. After bystander William Kenton Leal cut away Lincoln's collar while unbuttoning Lincoln's coat and shirt, and found no stab wound, Leal located the gunshot wound behind the left ear. He found the bullet too deep to be removed but dislodged a clot, after which Lincoln's breathing improved. He learned that regularly removing new clots maintained Lincoln's breathing. After giving Lincoln artificial respiration, Dr. Leal allowed actress Laura Keene to cradle the president's head in her lap, and he pronounced the wound mortal. Leal, Taft, and another doctor, Albert King, decided that Lincoln must be moved to the nearest house on 10th Street because a carriage ride to the White House was too dangerous. Carefully, 7 men picked up Lincoln and slowly carried him out of the theater, where it was packed with an angry mob. After considering Peter Taltavul's Star Saloon next door, they concluded that they would take Lincoln to one of the houses across the way. It was raining as soldiers carried Lincoln into the street, where a man urged them toward the house of Taylor William Peterson. In Peterson's first-floor bedroom, the exceptionally tall Lincoln was laid diagonally on a small bed. After clearing everyone out of the room, including Mrs. Lincoln, the doctors cut away Lincoln's clothes but discovered no other wounds. Finding that Lincoln was cold, they applied hot water bottles and mustard plasters while covering his cold body with blankets. Later, more physicians arrived including Surgeon General Joseph K. Barnes, Charles Henry Crane, Anderson Ruffin Abbott, and Robert K. Stone, Lincoln's personal physician. All agreed Lincoln could not survive. Barnes probed the wound, locating the bullet and some bone fragments. Throughout the night, as the hemorrhage continued, they removed blood clots to relieve pressure on the brain, and Leal held the comatose president's hand with a firm grip, to let him know that he was in touch with humanity and had a friend. Lincoln's older son Robert Todd Lincoln arrived at about 11 p.m., but 12-year-old Tad Lincoln, who was watching a play of Aladdin at Grover's Theatre when he learned of his father's assassination at Ford's Theatre, was kept away. Secretary of the Navy Gideon Wells and Secretary of War Edwin M. Stanton arrived. Stanton insisted that the sobbing Mary Lincoln leave the sick room, then for the rest of the night, he essentially ran the United States government from the House, including directing the hunt for Booth and the other conspirators. Guards kept the public away, but numerous officials and physicians were admitted to pay their respects. Initially, Lincoln's features were calm and his breathing slow and steady. Later, one of his eyes became swollen, and the right side of his face discolored. Maunsell Bradhurst Field wrote in a letter to the New York Times that the president then started breathing regularly, but with effort, and did not seem to be struggling or suffering. As he neared death, Lincoln's appearance became perfectly natural, except for the discoloration around his eyes. Shortly before 7 a.m., Mary was allowed to return to Lincoln's side, and, as Dixon reported, she again seated herself by the president, kissing him and calling him every endearing name. Lincoln died at 7:22 a.m. on April 15. Mary Lincoln was not present. In his last moments, Lincoln's face became calm and his breathing quieter. Field wrote there was no apparent suffering, no convulsive action, no rattling of the throat, only a mere cessation of breathing. According to Lincoln's secretary John Hay, at the moment of Lincoln's death, a look of unspeakable peace came upon his worn features. The assembly knelt for a prayer, after which Stanton said either, "Now he belongs to the ages," or, "Now he belongs to the angels." On Lincoln's death, Vice President Johnson became the 17th president, and was sworn in by Chief Justice Salmon Chase between 10 and 11 a.m. Within half an hour of fleeing Ford's Theater, Booth crossed the Navy Yard Bridge into Maryland. An Army sentry questioned him about his late-night travel. Booth said that he was going home to the nearby town of Charles. Although it was forbidden for civilians to cross the bridge after 9 p.m., the sentry let him through. David Herold made it across the same bridge less than an hour later and rendezvoused with Booth. After retrieving weapons and supplies previously stored at Surrattsville, Herold and Booth rode to the home of Samuel A. Mudd, a local doctor, who splintered the leg Booth had broken in his escape, and later made a pair of crutches for Booth. After a day at Mudd's house, Booth and Herold hired a local man to guide them to Samuel Cox's house. Cox in turn took them to Thomas Jones, a Confederate sympathizer who hid Booth and Herold in Zekia Swamp for 5 days until they could cross the Potomac River. On the afternoon of April 24, they arrived at the farm of Richard H. Garrett, a tobacco farmer in King George County, Virginia. Booth told Garrett he was a wounded Confederate soldier. An April 15 letter to Navy Surgeon George Brainerd Todd from his brother tells of the rumors in Washington about Booth. It read, "Today all the city is in mourning, nearly every house being in black, and I have not seen a smile, no business, and many a strong man I have seen in tears. Some reports say Booth is a prisoner, others that he has made his escape, but from orders received here, I believe he is taken, and during the night will be put on a monitor for safekeeping, as a mob once raised now would know no end." The hunt for the conspirators quickly became the largest in U.S. history, involving thousands of federal troops and countless civilians. Edwin M. Stanton personally directed the operation, authorizing rewards of $50,000, equivalent to $800,000 in 2020 for Booth, and $25,000 each for Herold and John Surratt. Booth and Herold were sleeping at Garrett's farm on April 26 when soldiers from the 16th New York Cavalry arrived and surrounded the barn, then threatened to set fire to it. Herold surrendered, but Booth cried out, "I will not be taken alive." The soldiers set fire to the barn and Booth scrambled for the back door with a rifle and pistol. Sergeant Boston Corbett crept up behind the barn, and shot Booth in the back of the head, about an inch below the spot where his shot had entered the head of Mr. Lincoln, severing his spinal cord. Booth was carried out onto the steps of the barn. A soldier poured water into his mouth, which he spat out, unable to swallow. Booth told the soldier, "Tell my mother I die for my country." Unable to move his limbs, he asked a soldier to lift his hands before his face and whispered his last words, which were, "Useless, useless," as he gazed at them. He died on the porch of the Garrett farm 2 hours later. Corbett was initially arrested for disobeying orders from Stanton that Booth be taken alive if possible, but was later released and was largely considered a hero by the media and the public. There are various theories about Booth's motivations for assassinating Lincoln. In a letter to his mother, he wrote of his desire to avenge the South. Doris Kearns Goodwin has endorsed the idea that another factor was Booth's rivalry with his well-known older brother, actor Edwin Booth, who was a loyal Unionist. David S. Reynolds believes Booth greatly admired the abolitionist John Brown. Booth's sister Asia Booth Clark quoted him as saying, "John Brown was a man inspired, the grandest character of the century." On April 11, Booth attended Lincoln's last speech, in which Lincoln promoted voting rights for blacks. Booth was vehemently opposed to this, and declared, "That is the last speech he will ever give." Enraged, Booth urged Lewis Powell to shoot Lincoln on the spot. Powell refused for fear of the crowd, and Booth was either unable or unwilling to personally attempt to kill the president. However, Booth said to David Herald, "By God, I'll put him through." After the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, a 3-week series of events mourned his death and memorialized his life. Funeral services and lyings in state were held in Washington, D.C., and then in additional cities and state capitals as a funeral train transported his remains for burial in his hometown of Springfield, Illinois. Lincoln's eldest son Robert Todd rode the train to Baltimore, and then disembarked and returned to the White House. Lincoln's wife Mary Todd Lincoln remained at the White House, because she was too distraught to make the trip. Robert took a later train to Springfield for his father's final funeral and burial. The remains of Lincoln's younger son, William Wallace Lincoln, were also placed on the train, which left Washington, D.C., on April 21 at 12:30 p.m. Millions of Americans viewed the train along the route, and participated in the ceremonies and processions. Lincoln was interred on May 4, 1865 at Oak Ridge Cemetery in Springfield. The site of the Lincoln Tomb, now owned and managed as a state historic site, is marked by a 117-foot-tall granite obelisk surrounded with several bronze statues of Lincoln, and soldiers and sailors constructed by 1874. Mary Todd Lincoln and 3 of their 4 sons, Willie, Eddie, and Tad, are also buried there. Thanks for watching. For more videos please click like and subscribe.